industry, meanwhile, helped propel that economy for years prior to the decommissioning of its two natural gas fields. But as I mentioned at the outset, the North Atlantic can be merciless.
82 Ocean Ranger disaster that left 84 dead, 56 of them Newfoundlanders. The resulting Royal Commission led to many safety improvements. I was a boy at the time, but I remember the emotional impact of that day. It was a day that shook us to the bone. And the pain lingered as the subsequent Royal Commission uncovered lapses in the safety regime. One of those commission hearings took place in a church hall actually just near my backyard. Despite those changes, tragedy struck again in 2009. Mechanical problems sent a helicopter taking 18 workers to an offshore platform, plunging into the Atlantic. Only one, somehow and miraculously, survived. I know honourable senators have discussed the link between S3 and the 2009 tragedy, and specifically the key role played by Senator Wells's late father, Robert Wells, who headed the subsequent inquiry into what went wrong, and whose recommendations were largely incorporated into the Offshore Health and Safety Act passed in 2014. And I know that Senator Wells has expressed concern over the delays that has brought us here today, and I will respectfully deal with that in just a moment. First, I want to focus on Bill S3's intent. We want to give Canada, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador an additional 2 years to December 31st of 2022 to finalize the numerous health and safety regulations that stem from the 2014 legislation. The Offshore Health and Safety Act clarified the roles of both levels of governments as well as regulators in preventing accidents and injury. And it outlined the safety roles played by everyone involved, from owners, operators, and employers to supervisors, employees, and contractors. In addition, the Act added the following to the safety regime: a new appeal process when someone is accused of violating rules, the establishment or clarification of employee rights, including the right to refuse dangerous work without the risk of facing reprisal, a workplace culture that makes clear that these safety concerns are a shared responsibility of everyone involved, an efficient regulatory regime that contains no jurisdictional inconsistencies, and finally, the inclusion of the transportation of employees to and from these sites. I want to focus now on a part of the Act that's especially relevant to today's discussion, referring to the creation in 2014 of transitional regulations so that the three governments could take the time to finalize permanent regulations. The transitional arrangement was set to expire at the end of 2020. The Government of Canada is asking, through Bill S3, for an additional 2 years to December 31st of 2022 to complete this work. Some are, of course, wondering why it would take up to 8 years to finalize this process. Well, as Senator Ravalier explained during debate, this is a highly complex undertaking. These regulations fill nearly 300 pages, and they incorporate by reference more than 100 domestic and international health and safety standards. These regulations also require vetting and approval by 3 separate governments, multiple ministries, and 2 jointly managed regulatory boards. This is consensus decision-making in Canada. It speaks well of Canadian federalism, but the fact is, this kind of approach is more time-consuming than unilateralism. My department initiated an extensive consultation process between 2015 and 2018 involving unions, companies, and other stakeholders. There were numerous meetings involving hundreds of stakeholders in both St. John's and Halifax. That was followed by 5 separate sets of written submissions. Many comments we received were incorporated into the new regime, and we also spent time removing some of the administrative burdens cited by stakeholders. This entire process, like so much else, has faced the additional challenge of a global pandemic. That's not the reason we didn't meet our deadline, but it has certainly exacerbated the delays. For example, we were scheduled to start full-day in-person drafting sessions the week of March 23rd of last year. Then the pandemic hit us. Suddenly, we were all working from home with Justice Department drafters trying to figure out how to do this virtually. And I should note that all of our technical advisors at both the federal and provincial levels and are with their respective occupational health and safety departments. They have been preoccupied on the front lines of the COVID-19 response. Despite these factors, I agree, this has taken too long. I assure honourable senators that we will get this done. We will get this done right. My department has a detailed implementation schedule working in cooperation with the Department of Justice and 2 provincial governments. S3 will give us the breathing space to get there, because safety is paramount. And any shorter time means shortcuts are taken. When it comes to the health and safety of workers, shortcuts are unacceptable. Honourable senators, the offshore industry has made life measurably better for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Nous devons protéger ces travailleurs.
We need to protect workers, and the best way to do so is to have a world-class safety and security system. I believe in it and I support it. Bill S3 helps us to get to the finish line, and I urge you to support it. Thank you, and I'd now be pleased to respond to your questions.
My officials now welcome your questions. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister. If I can ask the first question, and maybe it's a question I think many of us have. We hear you loud and clear as to the delays. Obviously, it's complicated, as you so well explained. You got to get a lot of people on side. It's consensus making. But I got to be frank, I just have difficulty with the delays. I cannot believe in today's world we could not have done it. I think maybe it represents a different priority that the governments have. So I have difficulty buying into it. I just want to be very frank. But how do we get comfortable that we're not going to get, now you're saying another 2 years, we're going to get there, don't worry. But how do you convince us when we've missed 2 deadlines? How do you make sure people get their safety and their precautions and whatever measures they need? How do they get comfortable with these delays? How do you explain that?
Well, the regulations are very complex. As I said, they're totaling nearly 300 pages. When it comes to the lives and safety, and we're all agreed on this, the men and women who work and are offshore, you don't take shortcuts. We owe them that to keep them safe. You've got to consider 173 domestic and international standards. That amounts to over 15,000 pages right there. They're developed consistent with the joint management framework that characterizes the Atlantic offshore. Regulations must be vetted and agreed upon by Canada, by the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, by the government of Nova Scotia, 3 governments. And that's not something that happens with the snap of your fingers. It is incredibly complex. It takes time. But that's precisely why Senator Wells's bill in 2014 included a 5-year period to get it done. There has been extensive engagement of stakeholders, particularly through 2016 to 2018. In fact, there was an amendment to the transitional regulations in 2017 to address a number of administrative urgencies, and that set us back some time. That fixed there. And then there's COVID. I mean, no one can ignore the impacts of this global pandemic. It forced us to change the way that we do everything, from institutional processes to regulation drafting, adapting to virtual working. That was challenging. It took some time. I'm confident that the work that remains can be completed within the time that this bill would provide if passed, though.
Thank you. Senator Wells, you had an editorial in a couple of newspapers this weekend, strictly to this point of delays. What's your question to the minister? How do you get comfortable?
Well, I've got a list of questions to the minister. I mean, the first one would be, and again, I reiterate what I said in my editorial, that this initial legislation was in 2014. We all know, we've all spoken about the history of tragedy that underpins everything we do in the offshore. What was being done in 2015, in 2016, in 2017, why did it take a meeting that was planned for March 23rd, 2020? And maybe I should ask this to your officials. What happened in the first 6 years?
Okay, then I'll ask Glenn, Tim, whichever of you is willing to take the question for the senator.